Hi everybody, this is Chris Aitken from MBA Prep School. We're going to make a start now. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. Our webinar is titled Separating from the Herd. And what we're going to focus on is giving you specific actionable things you can do to help you get admitted to Booth and Columbia, particularly if you are a finance industry applicant. In terms of a quick couple of introductions around your panelists. So firstly, Erin Hale, who's one of my colleagues, she spent 3 years in the Columbia office, where she evaluated thousands of applicants and supported hundreds of waitlisted candidates. And in the last few years as an admissions consultant, she's had multiple admits to the most elite schools. And my other colleague who's going to be guiding you today is Faisal Khan. Faisal also worked in the Chicago Booth admissions office, where he reviewed hundreds of applicants and has spent 9 years helping people get into all of the top tier schools. And what we're going to do today in terms of is helping you address a pretty significant challenge, which is, as you know, these kind of elite finance schools are amongst the most difficult to get into. So sort of, 80+% of applicants to these schools will be denied admission. And so really the key question is, with so many candidates that are well qualified, with so many candidates that have great profiles and GMAT scores and backgrounds and leadership experiences, what can you do to stand out? And so our goal is, if you're a finance industry applicant to one or more of these programs, today we're going to give you specific actionable insights on how to increase your chances of success at Columbia and Booth. And if you stay all the way through the webinar to the end, we're also going to give you a special limited time offer, so make sure you stay all the way through. One thing before I hand across to Faisal and Erin is that you'll see in your GoToWebinar control panel an area where you can post questions. We've put aside a good amount of time at the end of this today to answer all of your questions. So please queue them up there, and then we'll tackle them in the order in which we receive the questions. So with that, I'm going to hand across to Faisal, and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Chris. And as Chris mentioned, my name is Faisal Khan, and I used to work at the Chicago Booth admissions office, and I also have my MBA from Booth. As you all in attendance consider your future career goals and think about your MBA journey, the harsh reality is that applicants with backgrounds in finance looking to apply to institutions such as Booth and Columbia, that's a large population. And unfortunately, what that means is that there's very little differentiation at the end of the day with finance applicants. Most of you have accomplished a lot. You probably work at top-tier institutions, but so do others. You probably have great work experience, but so do others. You probably have really good quant scores in GMAT, you have great GPAs, but again, this gets lost amongst the noise within the finance pool. The other thing that you have to consider is that your goal is not exactly aligned with the goal of the AdCom who is reviewing your application. And by that I mean your goal is to get admitted to an institution such as Booth or Columbia. However, the overarching, or one of the most important goals of the AdCom is to craft a well-rounded class. At the end of the day, a well-rounded class is one that will lead to fulfilling experiences across the many years that MBA students will be together. That's where they'll form their networks. That's where they'll gain the greatest experiential learning. And that's what leads to satisfied alumni that give lots of money after they've graduated. And so your biggest hurdle to overcome is that you are going to contribute to this well-rounded class through your unique attributes, not just the fact that you have worked at a top-tier finance institution. The other challenge that you have is, despite the great effort that you'll be putting into your MBA applications, all the blood, sweat, and tears, the applications are read quickly. These are human beings on the other end who will be reviewing hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. And so oftentimes, your essays are read during commutes, they're read on mobile devices, they're printed out and consumed during downtime. And so there isn't much time or space to convey what differentiates you. And so what you'll be learning in the rest of this webinar are ways on how you can differentiate yourself. So Chris, if we move to the next slide, please. So what this really means for you is you have to work on standing out from the crowd. And unfortunately, no matter what you think, you are part of the crowd. We often come across candidates in the admissions office who feel they're unique because they've had international experience of some sort, or they've hosted a cultural event, or perhaps they worked at a bulge bracket bank or a Fortune 100 company. But again, the theme here is because these institutions attract such a large applicant pool, you are going to have to stand out from the crowd by talking about what makes you tick, what drives and motivates you. Think back to the most formative growth experiences that you've had personally and professionally, where you were faced with a crisis and you helped overcome that. Don't just describe the crisis, but describe your thoughts, your emotions, and how you grew through that. The other important attribute to consider is that you're going to have to have a very clear vision of what your career goals are going to be. Now, no doubt when you get to business school, these career goals may adjust slightly, but you have to convince the AdCom that you know exactly where you want to end up and how the MBA is going to help you get there. In fact, to exaggerate, you almost have to describe how if you did not receive an MBA from Booth or Columbia, your career goals would be shattered. Clearly, that's not the case, but that is the depth of research and impact that you have to provide in your essays and describe why their specific school. Because oftentimes I've seen, Erin's seen, Chris has seen applicants get tripped up when they talk too high level and in terms that are too generic, which actually could apply to any top business school. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erin to help you understand specifics of how you might be able to address some of these items.
Great, thanks Faisal, and hi everyone, this is Erin Hale. Thanks so much for tuning in today. So as Faisal mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how you can overcome this great challenge, and there is a way to do it, and we can certainly talk about that today. So one of the first things that's really going to help you to present a successful application and really confront some of these hurdles that you're facing is to establish fit. And the idea here is that, as you probably know, most top business schools care about a lot of the same things. So they're looking for demonstrated leadership among their applicants. They're looking for people who are likely to be innovative, who've demonstrated teamwork, have a global mindset. These kinds of things are quite common among all the programs. But as you research further, you are able to tell that each school is going to emphasize certain things more than others. And what these make up are a school's fit qualities, which are really the attributes or qualities in candidates that the school values most. So you really want to think about what in your candidacy really speaks to these aspects and sort of proves that you have these fit qualities. So really kind of customizing your application, particularly as your essays, to show that you possess these as well. So an example for Columbia would be an entrepreneurial mindset. So this is something that would be considered a fit quality for CBS because they're really looking for candidates who are those who can create opportunities and really make things happen, regardless if you're an entrepreneur or not, but sort of across industries. So these are the kinds of things you want to be looking for in the different schools that you're applying to help differentiate yourself and strengthen your application. Next, you want to focus on each school's unique offerings, which is somewhat related to the previous point. So there's, the trap sometimes people get into is that, okay, I'm going to write my business school essay, and then I'm going to cut and paste and pretty much use that same thing across all the schools that I'm applying to, make it a little bit easier on myself. There is an extent to which you can repurpose some content, but to really do a good job with your application, with your essays, much of it is going to be unique to each school. You really want to do your research, dig deep to see what does the school have that's different from others. What are they promoting in their offerings that they have that's going to be most beneficial to you, and speak to that in your essays. So, for example, at Columbia, this might be a retail and luxury goods master class, or an executives in residence program, or at Booth it might be the PE and VC lab, or an experiential learning program. Basically, these are the kinds of specific classes, clubs, professors, trips, programs, centers, conferences, speaker series, things like that that are unique to the school, that are really going to be beneficial for you and are something that you would want to focus on in your essays to show that you would derive value from the specific school offering, that you really need this in order to achieve your goals. Next, we would be talking about the unique attributes in your own candidacy. So this is really coming down to what differentiates you and makes you stand out, the idea of what makes you tick, as Faisal mentioned. So thinking about, why did you choose the path that you did? What struggles have you overcome? What inspires you? Among finance applicants, it's unlikely that your model is going to be better than someone else's, or that that's something that's really going to be relevant in your application to Booth or Columbia or any other top school. So you really want to highlight other attributes in your past that really highlight who you are and help you to stand out. So for example, this might be a particular leadership position that you took on, or a direct client interaction that you were able to speak to really show how you were kind of performing above and beyond your given title, really sort of outperforming your peers, someone who was really making an impact. I know I read an essay recently from someone who had a finance role, and he completely revamped the internship program at his company, and that was something that was sort of above and beyond and something really different that showed that he had these unique attributes and really set him apart from other potential finance applicants that he might have been competing against. And then finally, also somewhat related to this last point I mentioned, is the idea of what's in it for the school. So business schools want to admit students who both are going to benefit from an MBA, so really demonstrate a need for business school and the thoughtful reasons for applying, but who are also going to contribute. The idea of peer learning in business school is really big, that you are bringing things to the table from your own experiences. You've had high quality experience so that you're able to share your perspective with your classmates, and they're really looking for that in your application if you're someone who's ready to contribute. So this can be in a variety of different ways. It can be kind of more academic and practical things. So perhaps you've worked in 3 different countries for a significant period of time in each, and you've gotten a really rich perspective from that, an international perspective. Or perhaps you have had experience with a particular charitable cause and you want to bring those efforts to campus and maybe start a club pertaining to that when you get to school. Or maybe you're just an avid hiker and you see that the school doesn't have a hiking club, and that's something you'd like to start up when you get there. Or you're someone who's really demonstrated a strong ability to teach and share your knowledge with others, and that's something that you see being able to show the school you could do on a learning team once you get to school. So now that we've kind of talked about these general principles, in an overall sense, we're going to speak specifically about each school, and we're going to start with Faisal and Booth. We can move to the next slide, Chris.
Thank you, Erin. And so now we get into really the meat of this webinar. So what are the specifics that will help you stand out as a finance applicant to these institutions? So let's start with Booth. Booth has an incredibly strong intellectual tradition. And we've put down unashamedly smarter. This is a little tongue-in-cheek, but the Booth students and culture is incredibly proud of having written the textbook, having discovered the theories, having really laid the groundwork for many concepts in finance and economics today. Since the Nobel Prize in Economics was established, 7 faculty have actually won the prize, and many others are waiting in the wings. It's not going to be unusual for you at Booth to be attending lectures from a Nobel laureate and asking them questions. In fact, Booth encourages you to challenge your professors. And so think about that for a second. You're going to be empowered to challenge a Nobel laureate. That's a big deal. And that attitude pervades Booth. So you have to think about your past, your professional past. What are those situations where you challenged the status quo, and how did you learn from that? Maybe there was a very significant project, cross-functional, where you had to challenge the questioning of your managers. You challenged them as to why they were advocating a specific approach and how you convinced them to take a different path. Or maybe this was a major cross-functional project. I was helping a finance candidate from GE, and she had spent a significant amount of time on financial divestitures, where she had led a cross-functional team across multiple time zones, over 50 colleagues, and had to challenge their thinking along the way in order to successfully close that divestiture. That's the type of example where you want to demonstrate you've questioned in the past. And then you're going to enjoy learning. So another example is it's not enough to say that you value intellectual rigor. Maybe talk about a time when you were sitting in a meeting where both managing directors and VPs couldn't figure out how to value a specific financial instrument. And maybe you left that meeting, jumped on the internet, or went to the library and dusted off some textbooks to understand and brush up on your knowledge on these concepts, created a model, and had it ready for your manager the next day. That's intellectual rigor. And those are the type of examples that you want to dig up in your past. So Chris, if you go to the next slide, please. The other attribute that makes Chicago Booth unique, and which you would do well to discuss as a finance applicant, is the concept of economics that pervades everything at Chicago, be it marketing or supply chain or financial valuations. Chicago has an entire school of economics theory named after it, and this is another asset that they take great pride in. So it's okay to get deep into how you value financial knowledge and insights, and maybe demonstrate how you did that in your past. Booth is also unique in that it allows for competing arguments and theories. So the concept of efficient markets, where everything is baked into an asset's price, versus behavioral economics, where human beings are flawed and there are biases inherent in the market that can be exploited. These are not mutually compatible, but they both exist. They're professors, Eugene Fama on the efficient market side, Richard Thaler on the behavioral economics side, that both coexist and advocate their theories. And so again, think about work situations in your past where there were polar opposites and you had to chart a course in the middle and lead to success on a project. I'd also encourage you to really dive deep into why Booth is the right place for you. What about your career goals are going to be helped? What of your weaknesses are going to be addressed by attending Booth? Think about some of the unique aspects that Booth offers, such as Hyde Park Angels, which is one of the Midwest's largest VC angel organizations. There's VC competitions. There's the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is actually one of the biggest concentrations at Booth. Are any of these components going to help you in your journey as a finance applicant, either wanting to get into finance or as a finance applicant looking to switch out or stay in finance? As you look at the essay topics that Booth presents, which are the photos, this year they've had approach, which of the photos can you use to discuss these career goals? Chris, if you move to the next slide. The last item that I wanted to talk about that Booth takes great pride in is its flexible curriculum that really allows you to chart your own course. To take another example that many of you may be familiar with is the case study method, and Harvard is very proud of the case study method. In fact, as you're applying to Harvard, you need to be talking about how that process resonates with you, how you've learned from it in the past, and why you feel that in an MBA that is so heavily focused on case learning is going to help you achieve your career goals. For Booth, it's its flexible curriculum. So this is an institution where if you have a level of knowledge, you can come in and choose not to take Econ 101, Accounting 101, Finance 101, and move on to the next more complex course. No one's going to hold you back. It's up to you how you want to chart your course through this flexibility and pick those classes that are going to teach you what you need to learn. So talk about how you've navigated your career in the past where you may have charted your own course. And this is really where something, the non-traditional applicants comes into their benefit. They can talk about how after graduating they worked at company A, then moved to company B, then company C. But even for the traditional applicants, you can talk about how you chose a specific project to advance and address a strength and a weakness, and then you decided you wanted to talk to your manager about a gap and wanted to switch over to a different project or a different team or a different country or region in order to keep growing in your career. Talk about what about Booth's flexibility fits within your learning philosophy. Don't just rehash the fact that Booth offers a flexible curriculum. Anyone browsing the Booth website will be able to do that. But what about flexibility and being in control and ownership of your own career? Have you demonstrated in the past? That is going to go much further in convincing the Booth AdCom that you are an individual who would thrive in the environment, in the flexible environment at Booth. So those are some of the things to consider about Booth and what makes it unique and how you can specifically address your application. But I'd love to pass this over to my colleague Erin so she can tell you a little bit more about Columbia.
And just before we pass across to Erin, a reminder to everybody that you can ask questions using the control panel. We have a number of great questions already lined up, but take the opportunity because we have plenty of time for questions at the end.
Great. Well, thank you both. And moving on to Columbia. So one of the first things I want to talk about, especially for finance applicants applying to Columbia, is to sort of dispel a myth that's out there, I believe, that Columbia, or this idea that you want to kind of abandon your finance focus in order to differentiate yourself if you are a finance person, coming from finance or wanting to go into finance. Columbia particularly is really not looking to abandon that finance reputation that they have. They certainly are continuously sort of broadening and strengthening themselves in many different areas, but they are also pretty intent on remaining very strong in finance, especially with the New York location. And so it's not something that applicants necessarily want to steer away from, especially if that's really your true interest, because the school is always going to be wanting to admit for years and years to come, I'm quite sure, folks who are strong in finance and folks who are looking to go into finance or folks who are wanting to continue in finance. It's not something you need to really be afraid of or think that it's an outright disadvantage for you. What it does mean is that you want to, again, with this theme of differentiate yourself from the rest of the finance herd. So I would say you really want to show how you are kind of the best of the best. I would say that Columbia wants to admit the people who've been working in financial services or people who are looking to go into financial services who have the greatest potential or have the greatest demonstrated impact so far. So in your application, this comes back to the idea of really showing how you've made an impact in your specific niche that you've been working in, how you have demonstrated the ability to do well given what your goals are. But again, don't be so afraid to really show that this is what you're interested in, because it is a school that is very strong in finance. On sort of the other side of that, at the same time, you want to also be sure that in looking at your application, it's not completely laser focused on finance, because that can be really boring. I've read many essays that are sort of laser focused on value investing, for example. Columbia is obviously very well known and popular for the value investing program. And it's okay to talk about these things, but you want to present a very well-rounded picture of yourself. You want the admissions committee to believe that you're someone who has many, many interests, that there's a lot to you, you're multidimensional. So you want to be sure that as much as you may be talking about finance when it comes to your goals, in Essay 1, probably in Essay 2 a bit as well, you also want to show that there's more to you. You have other interests as well. Yes, maybe you want to join the Investment Management Association, but you also want to join the rugby club, or you want to join the gourmet club, or you want to be doing volunteer activities while you're there. So really, be sure you're presenting a well-rounded picture of yourself at the same time. And I would also just say in Essay 1, in terms of how this might correspond to Columbia's Essay 1, in talking about your goals, just be sure to show, be very specific about what your finance goals are. It's important with Columbia to be both ambitious but also very realistic in explaining what it is that you want to do. You wouldn't want to present a transition that's too crazy, not quite believable. Kind of think about baby steps to get you where you want to be that's going to be, again, achievable. Think about where Columbia students are going, what types of organizations are hiring them, and that may be a way to help inform the path that you're presenting. And you also just want to show that you have a need for the MBA. So yes, maybe you've been working in finance or you want to go into finance. What is it that you're lacking? Don't be afraid to say, I have this weakness or I have this need. This is something I don't have exposure to. And that's why I really need to go to business school in order to gain it. And if Chris, you can take me to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So another really important part about Columbia is its New York City location. And in fact, in the last couple of years, they started a new branding with this at the very center of business tagline, which you'll find as part of the SA2 question in the application. So Columbia really prides itself on this idea of bridging theory and practice, which has a lot to do with its New York City location. So it's the idea that they really value having just as much time spent in delivering your MBA education in the classroom, with theory and through your core classes, but also accompanying that with plenty of opportunities for experiential learning and really tying that to the practical applications of what you're learning. And they really believe they're sort of uniquely positioned to do that because of being in New York, where there is so much access and there are so many opportunities to have different adjunct faculty, for example, so practitioners who are working in New York and able to jump on the subway and come to class and teach the students right in class, kind of bringing real-time, they have master classes where you're really working with the senior leadership of a company to solve a particular business problem. There's the Executives in Residence program, the ability to do internships, not just during the summer, but sometimes during the year as well, because you're right in New York. Plenty of speakers. All these kinds of things are a real hallmark of the Columbia program, again, with this idea of access. And so what you want to do in your application is really show that you have a need to be in New York, that it's extremely important to you that your MBA experience is in a place like this where you have this kind of access, that you really believe in the idea of bridging theory and practice, that that's particularly important to you, and that in order to be successful with what it is that you're trying to achieve with your goal, you need to be in a place like, or not a place like New York, but specifically New York, I would say. And this really will come into play with SA2 that kind of asks you to talk about how you'll take advantage of being at the very center of business. And here you really want to focus on these types of things that are very New York specific offerings at Columbia. I know sometimes people get a little bit confused this year with SA1 and SA2 seeming to have a little bit of overlap. And I would really encourage you to just think about reserving all of the, or at least most of the very New York specific, New York focused resources about the program that are important to you and your goals for SA2, to really talk about the importance of the location there. And one other note I would say on that is just, if you have a personal draw to New York as well, that can sometimes be something to mention. So if you also have family in New York, or you've built a life and a home in New York that you'd like to stay close to, or you really have always wanted to experience living in New York your whole life, that would be something that you can work into SA2 as well, to discuss how you take advantage of being at the very center of business. And moving on to the next slide. Okay, so Columbia sometimes also fights a bit of a misconception that they don't have much of a community, which I would say is not true from having worked there, but more importantly than my opinion on that is just that the school is very cognizant of the fact that sometimes people assume that they maybe don't have a tight-knit community because they're in such a large city. So there's this idea that people are kind of just coming to class and then leaving and going out into the city and doing, all different kinds of things, or meeting up with people they know outside of school. And it's really important to them that they draw in people who are really looking for the tight-knit community that they do have, and are the type of students who are going to be actively involved, who are going to, bring their interests and their passions and their talents and really get involved and contribute and enrich the strong community that they have. Columbia is very proud of its cluster system and learning team system. So the cluster is the group of students you're put into to go through your core classes together. The learning team is the smaller group within the cluster. You do project work together. These are strategically formed groups to kind of be microcosms of the larger class. And it's bringing this idea of learning from each other when you're paired with people who are coming from different industries, different backgrounds, you know, different parts of the world to really learn from one another and be able to kind of help each other in different areas. And so Columbia is looking for people who are going to be able to contribute that. They're also looking for people who are not keen on sort of a cutthroat or competitive environment, because that's another stereotype there sometimes is about CBS. We're looking for student leaders, people who are going to get involved, as I said, who are going to join these clubs, make things happen, but who aren't you know, looking for a super competitive or cutthroat environment at the same time. So it's important to keep this in mind, I would say, especially for writing Essay 3. Essay 3, as you may know, talks about CBS Matters, which is an important part of the school. It was started by I believe, 2012 a student from the class of 2012 while they were still there, to put together these presentations about oneself so that students can get to know each other on a more deep level. And so the essay asks you to share something that your cluster mates would be pleasantly surprised to learn about you. And people often ask, you know, what should I possibly be writing about for this essay? So you want to keep these things in mind with this essay, that they're really looking to see, you know, not just what can you bring from the perspective of, you know, your career background or, you know, this knowledge and skills that you've developed. So they're going to get a sense of that in other parts of your application. So what is it that makes you unique on a personal level? What are your interests? What are your talents? What can you share with your cluster? So I would encourage you to think about what you might deliver in a true CBS Matters presentation as a student there, what you might be telling your cluster mates on the first day of school. I've had students, essays I've read that have been very strong where people talked about growing up on a farm and how that experience has been meaningful for them, or how they led their cricket team to victory. These different kinds of things can work in different ways, but I definitely would encourage you to kind of go to the more personal, really think about how you're going to contribute to this community as a unique individual based on your own experiences. And moving on to the next slide. So I want to talk here about something that applies to Columbia as well as Booth, and that's just the importance of demonstrating your interest in the specific school. Kind of the idea of the question of, have you taken the time to really get to know them? So as we discussed earlier, it's really important not to write cookie cutter essays that could be repurposed across every school. And in order to be able to do that, you really do have to do some work on your part. So getting to know the schools by not only going to, you know, one information session or one webinar, but maybe visiting a class, speaking with multiple current students, speaking with alumni, perhaps even speaking with faculty members, signing up for any other events that they might be having in your local area, ideally visiting campus if at all possible, because that is very important when it can be done. But even if you can't, you know, really being sure that you take advantage of all these other ways to engage. Contacting club leaders of clubs that you might be interested in joining, and arranging phone calls and email back and forth with them to really learn about the specific school offering. I think there are three major benefits from this type of sustained engagement with programs. Number one, it's going to allow you to write better essays. They're going to be more detailed. You're going to differentiate yourself by not just writing something that could have been written by anyone who has access to the internet, but you really are going to be someone who's done your due diligence and kind of dug deep to have a lot of great examples and compelling details. Secondly, it provides to the school evidence of your interest. So often some of these activities you'll engage in, some of these events are tracked by the schools and they're able to see what you've done. So if they're looking at an application from someone who says, you know, I really, really want to go to your school, and then they look to see what you've done to get to know them and it's nothing, or it's one thing, you know, several years back, that's not a super convincing argument. So it really helps to satisfy that piece as well. And then finally, it really does give you, as an applicant, greater clarity. So hopefully at the end of this process, you have the luxury of making a choice about which schools to attend. And if you've done this research and this work to see where you might be the best fit and where you can best see yourself, where you'd most like to go, it's going to help really inform your decision. But Faisal, do you have anything that you want to add on this topic?
Yeah, no, thank you, Erin. So just building on what you were saying, you know, I wouldn't rely on an info session that you attended years ago. You really need to show that you are on the ground, attending the events that Booth and Columbia are hosting in your city, in your area. Don't just talk about the 2 or 3 classes that you want to take, and that's why you want to be at Booth and Columbia. Go deeper than that. Talk about what about that class specifically is something that will help you achieve your career goals. Talk about the specific research of the professor teaching that class. and how that's going to help you. I had a candidate who wrote about how they attended a talk at a public event by a specific professor, got intrigued by their research, and that led them to the class that they were teaching at the business school. So it was a very comprehensive way of showing that student's interest. But Erin, I agree with most everything that you said. So Chris, if you want to move to the next slide.
Sure. So what I'd like everybody to do now is take the opportunity to load your questions up. So we're about to move into the Q&A section, and we've still got a good sort of 15 minutes to answer people's questions. And I already see a number of questions lined up, but if you'd like to ask something specific, you can use the question function in the GoToWebinar control panel. And just while those are loading up, with about 6 weeks left into the round 2 deadlines, just want to give you some sense of key ways that we could help you, that Faisal and Erin and other members of our team could help you right now. So if we were to start working together right now, we'd be focusing on how to identify your key points of differentiation and put together coherent messaging that's based on what you've done and who you are. So that would be something you'd want to focus on immediately. And then as you move through November into December, then translating those accomplishments and those points of differentiation into stories and positioning into essays that can stand out. So memorable essays, memorable applications, using every part of the application, and then obviously in the first few days of January, final polish editing and getting it all ready, and then hopefully moving you into mock interviews. And so as we move into the question section, I'd like to draw your attention to a special offer that we're promoting through Beat the GMAT. So for those of you that are on today's webinar, we're offering a $500 discount to work with either Erin or Faisal on your round 2 applications. And so if you're interested in that, you can go to mbaprepschool.com/BTG, and that's where you'll see more information about this, and you can apply there. So let's jump into the questions. The first question that I've got, Erin, is for you, and it's any advice for reapplicants coming from a finance background?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing for reapplicants is to consider what's different. The admissions committee is kind of asking themselves, okay, why are you applying again? Why should I consider your application again or perhaps differently? So you want to be sure you hit hard in that reapplication essay about what has changed. So ideally you have an increased GMAT score or a promotion at work or new responsibilities at work. Perhaps increased involvement in extracurricular activities. Maybe you've taken a class or two, to demonstrate your quantitative abilities because your GPA or your GMAT is not as strong as you'd like it to be. Perhaps you've had much more engagement with the school than last time you were applying, so you know a lot more about, why you would take advantage of it or how you would take advantage of it. And I would say for a finance applicant in particular, again, you want to just kind of assess what you did last time and perhaps try to find ways to improve to show, differentiate yourself in your position and in your role. So how is it that you're outperforming your peers? How is it that you're making an impact, performing titles above or a title above the one that you have? Really kind of assessing those things to try to put your best foot forward and put your application in the best light the second time around.
Thanks, Erin. Another question that was asked is, when we're talking about finance, does real estate development count within that? And I would say yes. It's certainly part of the finance pool. Next question I'd move on to would be for Faisal. Faisal, can you comment on how important a high GMAT score is to break into the finance industry?
Yeah. So the stock answer is that AdComs look at your complete application and your complete package, and so a low GMAT may be offset by great work experience, but the reality is that a GMAT score is a big component of your application, especially to Booth and Columbia, and there is going to be a check mark placed or a flag raised if you have a low GMAT. Now, the stats for these average GMAT scores are freely available on the school websites, and I believe for booth in Columbia, these are hovering around 730 for last year's class. And so this gives you an idea of the type of GMAT score that is commonly coming across an AdCom's desk. Now, I don't want to discourage anyone that has a lower GMAT score. That's where we would come in and help you tease out the unique attributes of your past and really help identify those components of leadership perhaps or unique experiences that show you how you've performed in the real world in a professional setting, and that would then help bolster your complete package.
Thanks, Faisal. The next question, I think we've addressed some of, but I'll throw it to Erin, which is, what's a good way to show school-specific fit? And you've already talked about some of the elements, Erin, but the other part of the question is, do we have an opinion on services such as heyivy.com that effectively match you to current MBA students?
I'm not familiar with that service, but I think most schools offer the opportunity to get connected with current students. And if you don't see it on their website, that's something very easy. You can poke around or ask the admissions office, and it's usually quite easy to get connected with current MBA students. And what you'll usually find too is that if you're speaking with someone and you ask a question about something they're not as familiar with, they're usually willing to connect you with someone else in their own network who's a student there, and then suddenly you've got lots of connections. And that's a very important thing to do. So I think everyone should be doing that as they prepare to write their application or to put together their application. In terms of the other part of the question, in terms of demonstrating fit, so again, it's just this idea of doing your research to determine what is most important to the school, and then looking inward at how have you demonstrated that. Are you someone who kind of matches to that viewpoint of the school? How have you demonstrated that entrepreneurial mindset? Or where in your candidacy have you shown a lot of intellectual curiosity? And try to, when you have the opportunity, speak to those types of examples, or when you're framing your resume, be sure to promote those parts of your candidacy that really speak to that. And those conversations with current students, of course, and information sessions that you do, in class visits, conversations with alumni, with club presidents, all those kinds of things are also going to help you see what sort of themes emerge that will help you to stand out and show that you're a good fit for that program.
That's helpful. The next question, Erin, is also for you, and for the person who asked this, I'm going to generalize the question a little bit. So this candidate is an architect by background and has 2 prior master's degrees, and he's asking is it advantageous or disadvantageous or neutral through the eyes of the AdCom when an applicant has multiple prior master's degrees?
That's a good question. I would say it is somewhat neutral, with the potential to be a negative, just speaking very frankly. I wouldn't let that discourage you from applying. I think it's very smart that you're thinking about this point. What you need to do, perhaps even more than others, is just really explain and demonstrate in your application why you need an MBA. They are just wanting to be sure you're not a degree collector. So they want to see that you have real compelling reasons for needing business school specifically. I would let your goals kind of dictate it. What is it that you want to do, and why is it that you need an MBA to get there, even though you already have these degrees? So really just doing your research to see what kind of path you're on, and showing that the business school is going to be the natural next step, the necessary next step in order to get to where you want to go.
That's great. And as a reminder, we have quite a few questions queued up, and we're going to get through as many as we can, but feel free to add your question through the GoToWebinar control panel. And also, if you're interested in potentially working with Erin or Faisal, have a look at mbaprepschool.com/BTG. Faisal, next question to you, and Erin, you might weigh in on this after Faisal's had a go. How helpful is passing level 3 of the CFA in the eyes of the admissions committee to finance applicants?
It's a great signal. I was talking about the intellectual rigor at Booth, and this is one which shows, hey, you take control of your career. You are looking at ways to advance yourself, both intellectually and professionally, and it's a good signal. It shows that you are someone who values the ability to constantly improve yourself. So I would encourage it. If you don't have it, it's not a mark against you. If you do have it or are about to attain it, it just continues to build a strong application for you.
I would just add, yeah, the only thing I would say to that, and I get this question sometimes pertaining to the CFA and also to taking additional courses, building an alternative transcript. You never, at least in the eyes of Columbia, you wouldn't ever want to spend a tremendous amount of time on something like that that's going to take you away from GMAT preparation. So your GPA you obviously can't change, but the best way to offset a GPA, at least for Columbia, is a super high GMAT. If you've taken it once, if you've taken it twice, and you're not at that level that you would like to be at or that you know you need to be at, you should take it again. Again, I'm speaking with Columbia in mind at least. And I sometimes have seen people spend a lot of time on these courses that they're taking or on trying to complete the CFA, and they would be much better served, in fact, spending that time and effort towards the GMAT, because that's going to be weighed much more heavily in the eyes of Columbia than the CFA, which is not a negative, but again, the GMAT weighed much more heavily than that or than an alternative transcript.
Thanks a lot. Faisal, the next question is for you, which is, this person is asking, is there any difference in the way you would approach this for part-time MBA applicants?
Yeah, the part-time MBA pool is much larger, and it's a slightly different applicant. They tend to be older, a little bit more mature, and they have a desire to stay within a function or a company, which is the whole reason why they're doing the part-time versus the full-time program. Overall, you still want to hit all of the same highlights that we discussed earlier in this webinar. So again, highlight all the unique attributes of Booth, including the ones that I mentioned, others that you come up with during your research with alumni, friends. But overall, because it's a larger pool that gets admitted to the part-time MBA program, I would argue that it's a slightly more relaxed path with the constraints aren't as tight as they are for the full-time MBA program, but your application strategy should not change or deviate from that of a full-time student.
A couple of different GMAT questions that I'm going to sort of combine into one. So one part of the question, and this is for both of you, one part of the question is how much more emphasis is placed on the quant side of the GMAT versus the verbal, if any? And the second part of the question is, if you end up with a high score, but it's imbalanced, heavily imbalanced between quant and verbal, should you retake?
Erin, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I would say, the entire score, the total score and the quant and the verbal are all highly valued. There's no way of getting around that. In terms of an imbalance, I would say, obviously, ideally, you would have all of them strong. If the imbalance is significant, I do think it's worth retaking. There's really not a lot of harm in retaking, except when it gets to the point, obviously, of compromising the time you have to spend on your application. But putting in that effort and showing the admissions committee that you were committed to trying to improve your score can also sometimes be recognized. So if you have reason to believe you can improve, I generally believe that it's best to try to retake the GMAT. I think the quantitative score is, definitely important, and perhaps what they're looking at right after they're looking at the total score, and then, verbal after that. Kind of the standard rule of thumb is that you'd like to be ideally at 80% or above for both subscores. But I wouldn't say the quant score is so much more important than the verbal, that the verbal can be disregarded because they're all quite important to the admissions committee, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'd echo what Erin just said. Only if there's an imbalance should you really think about addressing the scores. But overall, we look at your entire application, the way you're writing your essays. If it turns out that your essays are flawless English, but your verbal score is horrendous in the GMAT, that's a red flag. So we need to figure out, did you get help in the application? Is this someone who wouldn't succeed in an environment, an intense MBA environment? So those balances are where flags get raised.
We have lots of questions, so we're going to do our best to get to all of them. I'm going to ask one more of the GMAT-related questions, which is, have business schools started using the integrated reasoning scores?
To my knowledge, most of the schools are still working on kind of increasing their understanding of how to use that score right now. So I think that it's important. It's there. They see it. They know about it. But I think they're all still increasing their understanding at this point to use it as a real tool. I still think that the total score and the sub-scores are most important. But I think the IR score may be becoming more important as time goes on and the schools get more familiar with it.
Yeah, same at Booth as well. They're starting to think about how to incorporate it, but at this point it hasn't become a big component of the decision-making process.
This is another question to both of you, and I think you've both covered this, but perhaps just choose one example each from clients or candidates you've evaluated in the past. The question is, can you talk through a prototypical example of a finance person who has successfully differentiated themselves?
Sure. So I'll build on an example that I think that I had started to allude to earlier. So this was an applicant who was working in a finance role and sort of could have easily, I think not been noticed if he hadn't done some really, really great work with his sort of application strategy up front. So really thinking back through his past, both in his professional career and in undergrad, to think about the type of involvement he'd had, where he'd really made an impact. He was extremely thoughtful about his goals, really identifying where he wanted to be working, the space he wanted to be working in, what specifically, really doing research on looking at different MBA students' paths toward those goals. He was the one who had really revamped his company's internship program and wrote one of his essays, and was able to talk about this experience in adding this new project, and really showed himself as not only very strong at his job, which was evidenced, quite obviously through promotions and things, but having a lot more about himself to show. So this internship revamping, this volunteer work he had done with through the organization that helps people with income tax preparation, really showing this ability to kind of teach and mentor and be innovative in changing this internship program, and also having this very clear sense of what he wanted to do post-MBA that really made him stand out and kind of elevated the application that much more instead of getting lost in that noise.
Yeah, and so two examples, two quick ones, because I know we're running out of time. One was an individual who was a former rugby player and had traveled and played in tournaments globally, and was elevated to the rank of a captain, and used a lot of the same leadership examples that had helped him be successful as a rugby captain, in talking about how at work on Wall Street he was helping assimilate the new hires and had created a program that would help with onboarding, mentoring, coaching, so that these individuals would be successful in their careers. Great example. Another one comes to mind is someone who had a software background and in the finance space had ended up working with some of the developers on the platforms that the traders were using, and provided some suggestions that actually got incorporated. And that really shows an individual who's always looking to improve the process around himself in order to further advance the organization and their own career. So these are two very good examples that come to mind.
Thanks a lot. A couple of quick questions I'll hit directly. Somebody asked whether we're going to do webinars like this for other schools. I think depending on the feedback and the response you give to us, the answer to that is probably yes. Someone else asked about how we charge the fees for our consultants. If you want to fill in the form at the mbaprepschool.com/BTG page, then I'll be happy to get you that information offline. I don't want to take away from the Q&A right now, but thank you for that question. Erin, I'll ask you the next one, which is someone's asking about how important volunteer experience is through the eyes of the AdCom.
Sure. So this can be something to help kind of build that more interpersonal community aspect of your application if you're looking at it through the eyes of sort of professional, academic, and then the more personal extracurricular piece. I think candidates sometimes get a little caught up in getting nervous about this type of thing, that there's this formula that I haven't been on the board of this organization for 3 years and I'm not doing enough volunteer work. That's okay. I'm sure you're probably hopefully doing something. It doesn't have to be volunteer work, but they want to believe that you're a person who again has these interests and talents and passions outside of school and work and puts your time toward them, because they want to believe you're someone who's going to get involved and do similar things when you get to campus. So look instead at what you have been doing. Hopefully there's been some leadership positions there, but if not, really just leverage that and be able to show what more there is to you outside of school and work, even if it's not volunteer work. It's not going to be a deal breaker for Columbia.
Faisal, I'll direct the next question to you, which is any tips on how to stand apart as a former military service personnel? And in this case, someone who's been in the military and then has worked outside of the military for a little while.
Typically military experience is a great store of stories that can be mined to tease out leadership. When I was talking about building a well-rounded class, AdComs really enjoy applicants that come and bring that depth of leadership in stressful situations or having to manage complex problems that are ambiguously defined. So yeah, I would definitely play up your military background. But even within that military background, I would encourage you to search for those finance relevant activities that you took part in. It may be a little bit more challenging depending on the type of role you had, but I wouldn't be able to answer the question without having a little bit more information. But overall, military experience and the leadership component that comes with it is highly valued at business schools.
Unfortunately, we've only got time for a couple more questions because we're coming up onto the hour. But the next question we'll tackle is asking about how to differentiate yourself if you're a slightly older candidate, so late 20s or even early to mid 30s. And Erin, why don't you tackle that one, please?
Sure. I think this is going to come down to a question of showing why now. So the old, why business school, why now, why that school. So really showing that even though perhaps you're a little bit more advanced in your career, that this timing still makes sense for you. So being mindful of that in your application to speak to kind of the timing for you, and also in thinking about your goals. Sometimes the concern on the part of the admissions committee is if you're already, a little bit more experienced and you're at a more advanced level, are they going to be able to help you achieve the type of role you're looking post-MBA? They may be thinking you'd be better suited for an executive MBA program. So you really want to keep that in mind to sort of be anticipating those concerns and, sometimes subtly, sometimes more directly addressing them to show that a full-time program is really what you need because you have, XYZ goals, which really requires the full-time program for them. You're looking for a more immersive experience. And then also sometimes the concern with applicants who are a little bit older is that they're not going to be quite as involved community members just because maybe your life is a little bit more well established and you're just looking for the classroom experience and not so much outside of the classroom. So be sure you show what types of clubs you want to get involved with, that you're really excited about the community experience, if that's really what you're looking for as well. And I think that can help you to sort of combat some of the concerns that they might have.
Great. We'll cover two more questions. One, I'll just point someone towards something on our website, and the last question I'll open for both of you. The question that I'll point you to the website is someone was asking about how to think about whether a full-time or part-time program is right for them. If you go to mbaprepschool.com, you'll find an area that has lots of application tips, and there's a search box. We've written a couple of articles on that, so I'll point you towards that. And then, so the last question that we'll do today is a question that is basically asking about, I'm going to combine two questions which are around career goals. So one person is wondering if there's such a thing as too specific a career goal. A person is saying how to approach if they're not entirely sure what their career goals are. So two ends of the spectrum. And we'll end our Q&A session with both of you having an answer to those.
Yeah, for the career goal question, you know, it's always better to be specific. Just the litmus test that I encourage you to use is an AdCom isn't going to be an expert in your space, nor in your future career goal. Just make sure that you can draw a straight line from where you are today to what an MBA will help you do to get to your career goal. And so as long as the AdCom can, at the end of reading your essay, go, that makes perfect sense. This is how an MBA is going to help John Smith. That's enough. So you don't need to provide intense levels of detail as long as you've provided that fundamental.
Sure, and I would just add, I think the only way you can get into trouble with that is if you're so laser focused on, you know, say one role at one specific firm that you don't appear at least a bit flexible. You know, not everyone at any school is going to be able to go to a top 3 consulting firm. So you want to, without being wishy-washy, you know, do be able to articulate a plan B, you know, a backup plan, whether it's in an essay or if it comes up in an interview, to show that, yes, you have this very specific, you know, thought out goal in mind, which is good. But you also have thought about, you know, some alternatives that would be similar, or that would have, perhaps would be more of a baby step toward that goal if it didn't work out quite right away. And in terms of the other question, I mean, that's a very common challenge that business school applicants have. You know, I'm not sure what I want to do. And that's part of this process. I think, you know, we would always say when I was at Columbia that a successful application is one where you can tell that someone went through that process and really has been very thoughtful in thinking through these things. So just spend the time, you know, do your research, start talking to people. If you were to work with Faisal or me, that's something that we would certainly be able to help you with, you know, talking through career goals and potential viable paths for you to help articulate, you know, a compelling vision to the schools that feels authentic for you.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Apologies to those of you. There were still quite a few questions we weren't able to get to, but we're 5 minutes past what BTG had allowed us, so we'll wrap it up there. And please, if you're interested in taking us up on the offer to work with Erin or Faisal, go to mbaprepschool.com/BTG.